Happiness, when it arrives quietly, often feels most fragile just before it is tested. Daphne believed she was standing at the threshold of a new life. One built carefully and honestly with Carter Walton, a man whose steadiness and moral clarity had given her something she had long doubted she deserved. Peace. Their wedding preparations unfolded with an almost reverent joy, shaped by shared routines, future plans, and the comforting illusion that the past had finally loosened its grip. For Carter, the union symbolized stability after years of navigating other people's chaos. For Daphne, it felt like redemption, proof that she could move forward without being defined by the shadows she had once fled. Yet even as invitations were sent and vows imagined, something unspoken lingered beneath the surface. A truth Daphne had carried alone for too long, believing she could outrun it if she simply moved fast enough. The arrival of the child shattered that illusion with brutal efficiency. It did not come with warning or ceremony, but with the unmistakable force of consequence. The child's presence was not merely a personal revelation. It was a narrative rupture that demanded explanation, accountability, and truth. Daphne's past, long sealed behind careful silences, began to crack open under scrutiny. The joy surrounding the wedding dimmed as questions emerged, first whispered, then spoken aloud. Who was the child? Where had this life come from? And most dangerously, who was the father? The shockwaves reached Thomas Forrester with unforgiving speed. When his name surfaced as the alleged father, the accusation landed like an assault on his identity. Thomas, already burdened by a history of impulsive decisions and public scrutiny, was stunned to find himself entangled in a narrative he claimed was entirely false. He rejected the claim with fervor, not merely out of self-preservation, but out of conviction. He insisted there had been no relationship, no intimacy that could justify such an outcome. Yet denial, however sincere, rarely silences suspicion, especially within a family whose legacy is inseparable from scandal. As rumors spread through the halls of Forrester Creations, speculation took on a life of its own. The fashion world, accustomed to glamour and secrecy, devoured the mystery with thinly veiled fascination. Each whispered theory sharpened the stakes, turning Daphne's private crisis into public spectacle. The uncertainty surrounding the child's paternity destabilized not only personal relationships but professional alliances. Reputations trembled as the possibility of another Forrester scandal loomed, threatening to stain everything it touched. Daphne found herself trapped at the center of this storm, her past no longer hers to control. Every look she received carried judgment, curiosity, or pity. She had hoped to protect her child by keeping the truth buried. But the very act of concealment now seemed to endanger everything she loved. Carter, who had built his life on transparency and trust, struggled to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the reality unfolding before him. His love for Daphne remained, but it was tested by doubt and the gnawing fear that their foundation might be built on omission. The situation escalated dramatically when a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows, claiming to be the child's biological father. His arrival was neither tentative nor apologetic. He spoke with certainty, armed with details that Daphne could not easily refute. This revelation unraveled whatever control she had left, exposing layers of her past she had hoped would never resurface. The man's presence reframed the narrative entirely, shifting suspicion away from Thomas while introducing a new threat, one that carried legal, emotional, and social consequences Daphne had never fully anticipated. For Carter, this was the moment everything changed. The wedding, once a promise of shared future, now felt suspended in uncertainty. He was forced to confront an impossible choice between the woman he loved and the principles that defined him. As a legal professional, he understood the ramifications of custody battles, false claims, and hidden truths. As a man in love, he struggled to imagine abandoning Daphne at her most vulnerable. The tension between heart and reason tore at him relentlessly, threatening both his personal happiness and professional integrity. The fallout drew in the Forrester and Logan families alike, binding them together in a crisis that demanded reckoning. Old secrets resurfaced, alliances shifted, and long-standing resentments flared. The child became the focal point of competing narratives, each adult projecting their fears, desires, and regrets onto a life too young to understand the forces shaping its future. What should have been a story of protection and care transformed into a battlefield where love and entitlement collided. The custody battle that followed was brutal in its emotional intensity. Each claim to parenthood carried weight, not only in legal terms but in the moral arguments that accompanied it. Daphne fought fiercely, driven by a singular determination to protect her child from becoming collateral damage. Her reputation suffered as accusations multiplied, yet her resolve hardened. She refused to be reduced to a cautionary tale, insisting on her right to define herself beyond scandal. Thomas, though cleared of immediate suspicion, was not unscathed. The ordeal forced him to confront the lingering consequences of his past behavior. The ease with which his name could be implicated, and the fragile nature of trust within his world. He grappled with anger and introspection, aware that denial alone could not absolve him of a history that made such rumors plausible. As the two men vied for recognition and legitimacy, Daphne's life spiraled into chaos. The judgment of society weighed heavily, yet she stood firm in her commitment to her child. Her love, once quietly nurturing, became fierce and uncompromising. The future of the child remained uncertain, shaped by courtrooms, boardrooms, and emotional confrontations that no one could fully control. In the end, the story was not about who would win, but about what would be lost along the way. Love, reputation, and identity all hung in the balance as Daphne faced the consequences of choices made long ago. The child, silent yet central, embodied both the cost of secrecy and the possibility of truth. And as the world watched, each character was forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back into the light. Carter left town without ceremony, without confrontation, and without the kind of closure that might have softened the blow. His departure was not dramatic in the way heartbreak is often portrayed. It was quiet, resolute, and heavy with decisions made in the loneliest hours of the night. For a man who had spent his life believing in transparency, loyalty, and the law as a framework for justice, the betrayal cut deeper than anger ever could. It hollowed him out. He did not leave because he stopped loving Daphne, but because staying would have required him to betray himself in ways he could not survive. In the days leading up to his departure, Carter moved through his life as if underwater. Conversations blurred, familiar spaces felt foreign, and the future he had envisioned dissolved into something unrecognizable. Every memory of wedding plans, every quiet promise exchanged with Daphne, now carried the sharp edge of doubt. What wounded him most was not the existence of the child, nor even the secrets Daphne had kept, but the realization that the truth had been shaped around him rather than shared with him. He had been asked to stand at the center of a life built on omission. And that realization shattered the trust he had so carefully cultivated. When Carter finally decided to leave, it was not an act of punishment or revenge. It was an act of self-preservation. He understood that remaining would tether him to a narrative he no longer controlled. One that threatened to erode his credibility as both a man and a professional. The custody battle, the public scrutiny, the competing claims of fatherhood, all of it demanded a version of Carter who could compartmentalize love and principle. But he could not. The law had always been his compass. Yet now it pointed him away from the woman he loved, toward solitude and distance. His absence rippled outward almost immediately. Daphne felt it like a physical wound, a sudden vacuum where certainty had once lived. She had braced herself for judgment from the world, from the foresters, from strangers who consumed her pain as spectacle. What she had not fully anticipated was the silence Carter left behind. No arguments, no ultimatums, no dramatic goodbye, just the quiet confirmation that he could not remain in a life that no longer made sense to him. That silence haunted her more than any accusation ever could. Alone now, Daphne was forced to confront the full weight of her choices. The child she loved so fiercely had become both her anchor and her burden. The reason she endured and the reason everything else had collapsed. Protecting her child had once meant secrecy, now it meant confrontation. With Carter gone, the legal and emotional battles intensified. The man claiming to be the biological father pressed forward with renewed confidence. Emboldened by Carter's absence and the shifting power dynamics it created, his claims grew louder, his demands more aggressive, and the courts became the arena where Daphne's past was dissected with clinical cruelty. The Forrester family, already fractured by scandal, struggled to recalibrate. Thomas, though no longer at the center of the paternity storm, could not escape its fallout. Carter's departure forced him to reflect on his own role in the chaos. Not as the father, but as a symbol of how quickly assumptions could harden into accusations. He watched as Daphne was judged with a ferocity that felt uncomfortably familiar. And though his anger had once been directed outward, it now turned inward. He began to question the culture of silence and spectacle that had allowed such damage to unfold. Unchecked. Meanwhile, Carter attempted to rebuild himself in a place that knew nothing of his past. Distance offered clarity but not peace. He immersed himself in work, taking cases that demanded precision and detachment, convincing himself that usefulness could substitute for belonging. Yet even as days turned into weeks, the ache remained. Love does not vanish simply because one leaves town. It lingers in habits, in moments of quiet, in the reflex to reach for someone who is no longer there. Carter wrestled with guilt. Guilt for leaving Daphne to face the storm alone. And guilt for knowing that staying would have destroyed him. Back in Los Angeles, the custody battle reached a fever pitch. Daphne stood alone more often than not, her resolve tested by legal maneuvering and public judgment. Yet something within her hardened into strength. Carter's departure, painful as it was, forced her to step fully into herself. She stopped hoping for rescue, stopped believing that love alone could undo the damage. Instead, she focused on protecting her child with every resource available to her. Even as the cost mounted, her reputation suffered, her isolation deepened, but her determination did not waver. The child, oblivious to the war being waged around them, became the quiet center of Daphne's world. In that innocence, Daphne found clarity. She began to understand that the future she had imagined with Carter was gone. But not all futures were lost. Some were simply harder, lonelier, and forged through endurance rather than joy. She did not know whether Carter would ever return, whether forgiveness was even possible, but she knew that survival no longer depended on answers from others. As the story continued to unfold, one truth became unavoidable. Carter's departure was not an ending, but a fracture, one that reshaped every relationship it touched. Love had been tested and found wanting, not because it was false, but because it had been asked to carry more than it could bear. Whether the distance between Carter and Daphne would one day close remained uncertain. But in the aftermath of betrayal, silence, and sacrifice, each of them was being transformed, slowly and irrevocably, into someone new.